All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sienna Wessel, and I am a second-year master's student of botany at the University of Wyoming, where I research the response of sagebrush steppe plants to restoration efforts and environmental factors. And this summer, as a Scientists and Parks Fellow, I've been lucky to build upon this work in Grand Teton National Park, where a large-scale restoration project in the sagebrush steppe has been ongoing for over a decade. The sagebrush steppe is a unique and biodiverse ecosystem found across Western North America, where conditions are too dry for forest and too wet for desert, leaving shrubs in the genus Artemisia to dominate a top canopy, under which more than 100 grasses and flowers thrive. Furthermore, 350 vertebrate animals depend on this ecosystem, some of which can be found nowhere else on the planet. And there are two main community types that can be found in Grand Teton: a dry grassy steppe and a mixed shrub steppe. Unfortunately, the steppe ecosystem has been reduced to about 45% of its original range due to a variety of threats, including invasives, which upend natural fire cycles, reduced snowpack as a result of climate change, and land use for oil and gas extraction. And as a result, the once widespread steppe has become imperiled. In Grand Teton, about 1/3 of the park is designated as high-quality sagebrush steppe, but a large tract of land was converted to hayfields by early Mormon settlers. This 4,500-acre region, known today as Antelope Flats, is part of a stronghold of protected land in a sea of oil and gas extraction that also coincides with winter habitat for the threatened greater sage grouse and elk migration routes. And with the increasing threats to the steppe and the spatial importance of this landscape in mind, Grand Teton initiated efforts to restore the hayfields in 2009, and that work is still ongoing today. However, restoration is a challenging process that requires piecing together an ecological puzzle. So it is important to step back and assess how things are going and make adjustments where needed, a process known as adaptive management. And Grand Teton has been monitoring restored and undisturbed sagebrush steppe communities, which I'll further refer to as the reference communities, for over a decade in support of this process, but until now has not yet summarized results for management. Furthermore, restoration is more than just science and practice. It is also dependent on public and internal support. Therefore, it is crucial that restoration projects include active efforts to communicate about the science being applied, as well as the importance of protecting biodiversity. And this is especially true in the national parks, where these projects tend to become very public-facing and are not always well understood. For example, last year in Grand Teton, there was damage caused to a recently seeded restoration site by a large group of dirt bikers who used it as a track. And further, locals and visitors to the region often have false assumptions that the steppe is not at risk or worth protecting. With these challenges in mind, my summer fellowship focused on a diverse set of projects in Grand Teton, which applied science to improve land management and to enhance awareness of the need for sagebrush steppe restoration within the park. The field component of my work involves surveys of ephemerals, or early spring flowering species, which are key foods for wildlife and represent an important ecological group. And because these species are not captured in the typical monitoring timeframe, I developed and implemented a survey design and developed survey routes and ARC field maps to capture ephemeral diversity across sites of different ages, as well as the reference communities. In this graph of the results, each species is represented by a unique color, and more stacked colors indicate higher diversity. So what I found is that some ephemerals are colonizing early on after restoration and are found frequently and ubiquitously across restoration sites, but that other species only occur in the undisturbed reference communities, suggesting that managers may want to seed and monitor these specific species in order to speed and track ecosystem recovery. And another big takeaway from this graph is that the diversity of ephemeral species appears to be independent of restoration age and is rather site-specific. The next component of my fellowship focused on digesting a variety of analytical results from restoration monitoring data into clear management relevant summaries and recommendations. So this work involved taking complex plots and turning them into readable figures and bulleted points that could communicate key points briefly. And this came in the form of a white paper, which can be distributed to land managers, NPS leadership, and potential donors alike. For example, I turned this complex dendrogram of hierarchically clustered species abundances into a simplified model of community recovery. And here I demonstrate that the clustering analysis shows that communities follow two main divergent paths of recovery as they mature. One which leads the majority of the restored communities to become invasion resistant and highly grass dominated. And the other which leads to a more complex structure of shrubs, grasses, and flowers, but also a significant quantity of exotic grasses. In order to understand the drivers of these divergent pathways, I summarize the results of multiple regression models, which assess the impact of multiple factors on restoration outcomes. And results show that outcomes have been highly contingent on soil texture, seed mix design, and post-seeding weather conditions. For example, sandier soils push communities towards targets such as higher species diversity and similarity to reference communities. Heavy grass seedings decrease target wildflower abundance, and warmer winters lead to greater invasion and selection for drought-tolerant species. However, these factors aren't currently considered in the restoration planning and management process at Grand Teton. So in light of this new information, my management recommendations would include decreasing grass proportions in the seed mixes, extra invasive management control after warm winters, and the development of a climate change mitigation plan in conjunction with restoration, for a couple of examples. On the science communication front, I engaged Jackson, Wyoming locals with the Antelope Flats Restoration Project through a half-day plant ID workshop. And I led these attendees through the basics of sagebrush steppe plant identification and shared about ongoing work to preserve steppe biodiversity in the park. And this event generated a list of trained, invested volunteers for future work like seed collection and plug planting in support of restoration. Furthermore, time was allowed for attendees to meet with Grand Teton vegetation staff, ask questions, and generate deep discussions about land stewardship in the region. Finally, I developed a social media campaign called Secrets of the Sage, with the goal of increasing awareness of the value of the sagebrush steppe ecosystem, as well as the need for restoration in the park. The culmination of this series will be the release of an interactive multimedia story map that I developed for the Grand Teton website. And this story map guides viewers through the ecology of the sagebrush steppe, the history of cultivation in the region, and the ongoing restoration work. It also includes an interactive tour of the restoration site with different points that allow users to click and get information about different restoration site design, outcomes, and see attached photos. And many of the information and images that I've shared today are part of this story map. And with that, I conclude my multifaceted fellowship journey to protect sagebrush steppe biodiversity. Thank you to the Grand Teton Vegetation Branch, the Ecological Society of America, and the Scientists and Parks Program for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.